Design Notes is a show about creative work and what it teaches us. I'm your host, Liam Sprodlin. Each episode, I speak with people from unique creative fields to discover what inspires and unites us in our practice. In this episode, I welcome designer, educator, and author David Reinfurt back to the show from his studio in New York to discuss his new book, A Co-Program for Graphic Design. This book, like his last, was born out of a series of lectures, this time during the shift to remote learning that took place at the start of the global pandemic. By inviting a group of collaborators and cooperators into the classroom with him, David exposed some of the unexpected and intuitive overlaps between design and the rest of the world around us. In our conversation, we talked about the importance of teaching design with multiple voices, working with your hands, and recentering intuition in our day-to-day practice, even as the context and meaning of our work continues to evolve. Let's get started. David, welcome back to Design Notes.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We recorded an episode, I think it was back in late 2019, early 2020. So it's been a while, both in terms of linear time and also psychologically, I think. So for listeners who might not have been around for that episode or haven't listened to the back catalog yet, could you give us a brief intro on kind of what your work is now and how you got there?
Of course. That has been a million years ago, it feels like. And there is a palpable difference between real time and felt time in the last 5 years. In some ways, that's what this book deals with. But let me give some background. So I'm an independent graphic designer based in New York. I've worked independently for 25 years. It's quite a long time. I have worked in collaboration with many different people in different ways, but most substantially with Stuart Bertolotti Bailey under the name Dexter Sinister, and with Stuart Bertolotti Bailey and Angie Kiefer and Francesca Bertolotti and Vincenzo Latronico as the Serving Library, a publishing project. And finally, as ORG, which calls itself a small software company, and is me with a rotating cast of people assisting. So I have taught at Princeton University now for 15 years. When we spoke in 2019, we were talking about, in part, my book, A New Program for Graphic Design, which came out of the teaching at Princeton University. And in fact, it's useful to understand the genesis of that book in order to place the new book. So when I started teaching at Princeton University, there were no previous classes in graphic design. I was invited in by Joe Scanlon, who was director of the visual arts program at Princeton, to develop a graphic design course. And that first one was typography, and those grew and became several courses and a number of instructors. In 2017, Inventory Press approached me and said, we think what you're teaching at Princeton might find a broader audience. And I had just finished a book, co-writing a book about Muriel Cooper for MIT Press. I was exhausted by that process. It was involved and rigorous, and it was a large book. So I wasn't up for writing a book at that time, but in conversation with Adam Michaels and Shannon Harvey at Inventory Press, we came up with an idea to, instead of writing the book, to speak the book. And so we staged a 3-day event in Los Angeles at their studio in Silver Lake, where I delivered 6 45-minute lectures a day over the course of 3 days for a kind of conscripted audience of students in a carnival-like atmosphere where I would, each day constituted one class that I had developed at Princeton. So the first day were 6 lectures around typography. Those were all video recorded and then transcribed, and that became the new book. Okay, so that book launched in September 2019, and I proceeded to do a number of launch events and kind of exhibitions around the book, which continued until the end of February 2020. At the end of February 2020, I was set to do an exhibition and a talk in Rome at the French Academy. And it was about February 20th, I think, when I was set to leave. And there was a novel coronavirus circulating widely in Italy. And I really wanted to go, but in conversation with another Inventory Press author, Jeffrey Schnapp, I decided that it wasn't such a good idea, which, of course, in hindsight is very clear what to do. So by March 11th, I had walked out of the classroom at Princeton expecting to come back, but I never returned until 2021. And of course, classes moved online in the meantime. So I walked out in March of 2020, and classes moved online. The world went into a lockdown situation, as we all well know. I found that my Princeton students responded really well to the online situation. They were up for it, and they logged in from wherever they were in the world and from their different time zones and different situations, and classes proceeded, but of course they were different. And the situation was only amplified by the rise of the Black Lives Matter social movement in particular, just later that spring with the murder of George Floyd and the kind of global movement that multiplied. And so anyway, combined with these factors of realizing I needed to really rethink how to teach online, just practically and logistically, as well as reconsider the subject matter and the number of voices that were in the room. And teaching online in a Zoom classroom gave me the opportunity to invite lots of different people who I wanted to hear from, and to step back from the front of the class, which I try to do anyway, but that just gave me a really easy way to do it. You know, somewhere along after teaching online for 2 semesters, I started to realize, oh, of course, teaching this way, all of the classes were being recorded and transcribed automatically. And I had these new classes offered a lot of new material that was more in line with how I was thinking about teaching. And so an idea sparked in my head to make a book a bit like the first one, where it was edited from transcripts and has the quality of the spoken voice, but where the speakers were mostly not me, or as much as possible not me, but were other people, and collaborators, or more often I would call them cooperators, who helped round out the material in these 3 classes. And in fact, it's important to say that even one of those classes, the middle class, Chapter 2, Multiplicity, was co-taught with Philip Ording. So all of those ideas were developed together, and the voices were equivalent. Okay, I think that's a long background.
Sure, but necessary. There are a lot of things that stand out to me about that. One thing that I want to ask about up front is like this kind of, deriving the structure of the book from delivering courses, especially, in the instance of the first book, you delivered them in this kind of like marathon of classes.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that changed your relationship to the ideas that you were presenting, or changed your kind of understanding of those topics, delivering them in such quick succession?
Well, it certainly made me think about the way that teaching is a performance. And I acknowledge that while I'm not comfortable with it. And so in that situation, teaching was like explicitly a performance. It was 45 minutes each one. We'd take 15 minutes so my voice could recover, and I drank juice, and there was like musical interludes, which were quite fun. And the whole thing was treated as it was lively generally. And I guess that looseness is something I want to have in the classroom. And so I try to mix things up as much as possible. And so, performing those classes in that way, I think it maps back onto how I think about the classroom. And I guess makes me even more so kind of embrace the performative aspects of it, because I think that's what loosens people up. And so in a class recently, at the beginning of this semester, I invited a class. When we did our introductions, we all stood on stools. So we were basically at the, which is rather awkward. But it again just, lets people loosen up. These are art classes after all.
The last time we spoke, you also mentioned like putting your teaching into the form of a book and some like tension there between the content that you were presenting and how the form of a book might make it more static or concrete. I mean, it's hard to achieve a carnivalesque environment within a book. And I wonder how your perspective on that has changed now, especially having gone through this whole, transformation of teaching online and seeing how that works, and also integrating these kind of new class structures.
I think one thing I was anxious about with the first book was that my students would see the book, would read the book, and then bring baggage to the classroom. And I'm happy to report that the book flies under the radar for the students. So this is great. I never mention it. And I mean, I could, but I don't. I feel like it would not help the situation. It would only kind of hinder it. And so that has been a nice surprise. This is one thing that was a nice fallout from recording the first book in this way, is that the voice on the page has some measure of self-doubt. And I feel like that is 100% necessary in teaching, because your position communicates the opposite of that. And so, and the kind of student-teacher relationship presumes that the teacher knows what she or he is talking about, and it's only partially the case. I mean, we can share our perspective, which was what we learned with and what we have thought about, and that never aligns with individual students' perspective coming from where they come from. So anyway, I have something to offer. I have my experiences. That's it.
I think that's an important note, and I think something that really stands out to me with the new book is that it's kind of building on this thesis that was developed in the first book of teaching design. I also noticed that you said that this is an art class, which I really appreciate. I want to hear more about kind of your theory of teaching design, especially how it shows up in a co-program for graphic design, where, as you said before, you really integrated other people into the lesson in a way that feels kind of central to the whole idea of teaching design.
Well, I'm glad you appreciate the art reference. It's how I think about design's kind of neighbors. And it happens to be at Princeton, the design classes that I teach and that Laura Coombs and Laurel Schwolst currently also teach. They're in a visual arts program, and it's a small program with 16 students per year, and the classes are small, 12 students who come from different disciplines. So anyway, I suppose to your second question, the kind of cooperative makeup of the second book, that was really a consequence of just realizing, as everybody else did, that I could invite people from all over, and there are people I wanted to hear from, people who I didn't necessarily know or didn't know well, and then lots of people I did know well, but who coming to class previously would have been too difficult. And so I just loaded the classes with visits as much as possible and tried to let the visitors drive what was talked about. I feel like as long as they know what the rubric of the class is, then they're going to bring something interesting to it. So that was a practical response. And I think it was only afterwards that I thought, oh, okay, this is really like a chorus of voices, and that is what that's what I'd love to communicate as a way of thinking about design, because I always like to I often like to quote Bruno Minari, who talked about design as always being a group activity, like designers work in groups. He was emphatic about that. And although I've like practiced independently, it's never by myself, right? It is, and I just think design is structured by the client designer relationship to begin with. Designers often don't have all the expertise they need, and so they bring in, other people to work, and that fluid and kind of cooperative nature of doing any design project is something I really enjoy. So it's not like I'd make a distinction between collaboration and cooperation. So I think collaboration has some, there is some idea that it is two or more people kind of blending their ideas together to make something better that neither one would have made. And I've done that before, and that can be wonderful. But I think much more often I work cooperatively, where it's individuals who kind of bring in what they know how to do or what they have good insights on, and they work doing that, and the sum total of those results adds up to something better. And so cooperators have a bit more agency, they're a bit more independent. There's not this like presumption that, compromise is not really part of it. The best design doesn't result from compromise, the best design results from like cooperation. And so everybody's pointed towards the same goal, and you figure out how to get there by bringing your best stuff to the project. So.
I want to also get at this note of, your students are approaching these design lessons from different disciplines, which is something I hear a lot on the show, that most of my guests, I would say, when I ask them about their journey in design, they say something like, I took a very nonlinear path, or I have an unusual story about how I got to design. And I wonder what role you think that might play in the practice of design ultimately.
Well, yeah, I think that's interesting that that's a common thread. I wonder if that's like the kind of people who you've asked on your podcast. However, so yeah, I would say I had a like non-conventional approach into design, but it sounds like it's actually rather like being non-conventional is actually the standard rather than that. Exactly. Isn't that funny? Okay, so in the classes, I love the fact that students are studying different things, come from different disciplines. It might be like aerospace engineering, or it might be neuroscience, or it might be English, or it might be physics, or whatever else. Actually, lots of computer science students because of the adjacency and importance of design in there. Anyway, I guess I always am convinced that design thrives on being a generalist activity. Like people who design are inevitably interested in lots of different things. And I have previously attributed that to the fact that design doesn't really have a subject matter of its own. It only comes into being when it touches some other discipline. And so you are asked to, well, for example, I'm designing a ADA accessible sign for an old castle, which is an art institution in Italy. That's what I was doing this morning, as it would turn out. And it's fun because the criteria are different than I understand. And I understood some things about, I understood some things about that area previously, but they have experts who are experts in this kind of signage, and specifically for public institutions in Italy. And so that's a much more granular thing. And so it's interesting to hear. It's useful and eye-opening to hear what their insights are. And it gives you some additional criteria to what you would think is a successful design or not. So I love that kind of thing. I think that's unique to, or characteristic of design, and certainly graphic design. And so the students coming from their various areas of study just make it richer because they'll have insights. That being said, the classes angle a certain direction. I do get a lot of computer science students, like I mentioned. I think I get quite a few engineering students, also like general electrical engineering, whatever. But I'm always excited when I get humanities students because they really bring some different concerns into the classroom, which is great.
Yeah. I think one way of understanding design maybe that stands out to me, especially in the multiplicity section of the book, is kind of an emphasis not just on being able to create a system or create an artifact, but knowing how to observe and decode the systems around us, or to see how they emerge from the world around us. And I guess yeah, I guess I'm interested in that concept of like folks coming from different viewpoints. You know, design is always has a positionality in the world, and I guess it's like applying that lens to different eyes.
Well, in the case of multiplicity, like the class was set up to bring together topology and graphic design and try to figure out where the two might meet. And right from Philip Ording is a professor of topology. He's currently at Pratt. He is a friend and somebody who we've had this ongoing conversation for quite a while. And I think Philip had the idea originally that one area where the two disciplines meet is particularly in like software-based design projects, where there might be, like he called it a multiplicity of like right answers or of like viable candidates, which might be, for example, defined parametrically, like by parameters that define a like design space, a possibility space. And so this is something, these possibility spaces of like equally equivalent answers are something that that topology gives us very strong tools to evaluate. So the class begins with an example of Snowflake Bentley, who was a farmer in northern Vermont who took photomicrographs, like using a microscope and a camera to make pictures of snowflakes. He did this at the turn of the 20th century and made exhaustive records of snowflakes. They're absolutely gorgeous things. No two are alike, as the story goes. And he published a book, which is a Dover Press book, which has many of the photographs in it. Here's a kind of like, I guess we could say, a design, which is a symmetric ice crystal, which has lots of shapes which are related to each other, and you can put those in an order, and you can put those in like a linear order from like most pointed to least pointed, or you can put those in 2 dimensions of like most pointed to least pointed and most detailed to least detailed. And there you have you've articulated a possibility space of lots of like valid responses to what is a snowflake. And this is something that design increasingly does with like software-based approaches, of course, and something that topology, like just that, the way in which Philip talks about how those are related, opens up lots of different ways to think about it. It's like frankly exciting in that way. And also just to watch another approach to talking about this and to drawing it. Like I was so surprised, and it's a revelation to watch him lead us through problems where his approaches were so mechanical and kind of like you just like draw it out. You take all the circumstances and you try to draw yourself a map, and then you refine that. Anyway.
Yeah. I first of all, I found that fascinating. I find the concept of design space fascinating and woefully underused in my own industry, which is UX. But something I also noticed, or that, I went really deep on that lesson, and I noticed that so many of the exercises, not just in that class, but in all the classes in the book, rely on a really like tactile component. Like it feels like you're always doing something with your hands, which is really interesting to me, not only from the perspective of pedagogy, but also because these classes were structured in a way that they could be performed remotely.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if that's a great thing to pick up on and not something that had occurred to me before. I love that. No? I mean, whether it's like Philip, Philip had a document camera, which is just a for Zoom or for anything, and so
Mhm.
you could see him writing on a piece of paper, and that was absolutely compelling to me. I like love to watch that. It's so nice to see, um, and just kind of watch as his like giant pencil on the screen like work through this issue. I wonder if it was, yeah, I wonder if it was like a compensation technique for us, like saying, oh, you got to use your hands because we're sick of looking at the screen and doing this. Um, uh, I expect it was, yeah. And yeah, a lot of the assignments do have a hands-on, require physical artifacts. But I do that in the classroom too, like
Right.
always, just because I find, just think about like how your body moves when you cut a piece of paper versus when you move something with a mouse. And the more range we have, I think the more it loosens up ways of thinking and like being in the classroom and et cetera. And so, I've often had students use paper and scissors or X-Acto knives and photocopiers in place of computers. And anyway, I just try to keep them off the screen
Yeah.
as much as
I
reasonable. Yeah.
hesitate to claim this as fact because I don't have a citation in front of me, but
Fine.
I'm pretty sure I've heard that that handwriting is more effective than typing, and this feels intuitively true to me as well. That
Mm.
at it's more beneficial for learning and memory, and my intuition is that maybe doing physical exercises like this with your hands not only helps you get a sense of what you're doing better from the physicality of it, um, but also that it might change your relationship to what you're making. I think maybe if you're just sliding rectangles around in Figma, then
Yeah.
you might not have as strong of a subjective connection to the result.
That rings completely true to me. And I wonder if it's like it takes, I like the fact that it takes longer and it is slower. And so that immediately you build up more investment in it. It's so sad to see like something made so quickly with very little investment. She's like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
can do it like this. Well, no.
I'm a believer that that shows up on the other side as well for the
Mm.
viewer.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I can't help but also think, because this is like up front in the book, and this is like a quote that I go to often from Karita Kent, that
Mm.
we have no art, we do everything as well as we can. I was also so hyped to see that in the book as well, because I think it's really important. And I think, we've talked a lot about how people bring different perspectives to the work, how people are coming from different places, how they're, learning to identify these systems through their own eyes. And yeah, I wonder what you think about like the positionality of design as a concept. Like the quote would suggest that it's actually just part of everything else. Like it's part of life,
Hmm.
right?
I mean, I think that's what draws those of us who want to work in design into it, is that it's not separate from everything else. It's, art relies on a concerted disinterest. Like there's some space between you and the work, and that's great. That's wonderful for art because it gives you a moment, a space in which to like to behold the thing that you're looking at, to think about it, to ruminate on it, and to have new ideas. Design is much more imminent. It's like right there. It's like the door handle that you just pushed. And so there's less time for reflection, which may not be great, but there is a connection to everything else you do in the world. And so if you're somebody who thinks that how you set the table is as important as how you design the latest thing, then I think you may find yourself working and happy in design. I feel like it's almost an ethical disposition,
Mm.
um, that you don't see a distinction between kind of categories, I guess. Um, I mean, I love, that Karita Kent quote is amazing. And if I can recommend tracking down the Lucas Blade Locke film, which is about Karita Kent, which is a documentary, and you get to hear her say it. She says it many times. She says it so many times in those clips. But at one point, she appends it with, you don't have art off in this little niche somewhere, like separate from everything else in the world. And that idea is, just as compelling to me as it sounds like it is to you. Like it's part of everything else. So.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way of framing art and design, but also framing life.
Yeah.
To kind of affirm that, like, it's just part of what we're doing.
Yes.
I'm really interested in this comparison between art and design. I mean, as I always am, but specifically how you put it, that art kind of leaves a space between the artifact and you. And I wonder, this might be hard to answer as a designer yourself, but I wonder first if you have seen something designed that created that space or triggered the same kind of reflection, or if that would no longer be design.
I think the former. I've seen so many things that do that. And maybe I'm willfully reading them into the situation. But I think any design work that like stops me, it stops me because it like includes some kind of dissonance. It makes me, it's not too smooth. It's not invisible. And it makes me think, oh, why is it like that? And what does that make me think about the world and this kind of thing? So I think it still remains design. That's the kind of work I want to make, where it gives you pause for a minute. It does what it needs to do, but maybe it doesn't do it exactly the way you thought it was going to do it, or it doesn't do it in the most invisible way, unless that's baked into the kind of prompt, and then great. But I would really say like works of design that I like almost always have that space or that kind of like thing that doesn't quite line up. Something is just a bit wrong.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think often in UX design, we are so trying to close that space and run away from unexpected and friction and space.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important lesson. It also strikes me that like creating that tension on purpose can actually be, I mean, it's not just gratifying for designers or designers who encounter the work, but also for the people who are ultimately using the work.
I would guess that the attempts to close that space like also do a little bit to curtail imagination. And so sometimes like the most wonderful things are the unexpected things, and they may work absolutely smoothly. They're just not what you thought it was going to be. So isn't that wonderful when something like teaches you how to use it rather than conforms to your, conforms to the way that, to the majority experience of how things have existed before. And of course, I always think about like how quickly conventions harden in interface design specifically, because of the like scale problem of so many people using these things from different places, et cetera, which are all very important issues. The kind of jumps from one interface idea to another are acts of imagination, and they don't conform to what existed before. And you have to cultivate room for those to happen, or it's useful to cultivate room for those things to happen. And it's often hard to justify at the same time. I'm sure, as I understand you deal with. So
completely. It makes me think about, again, like the positionality of design, not only, socially and as part of the environment, but also temporally. That, these, at least speaking from UX design, so many of these conventions emerged from specific incentives at specific times in the development of technology, and now they're like sticking around.
Right.
But often I think these things mean something else when they have been around for 20 years. Which, I think is an important lesson for fellow UX designers to consider, but I'm also, I want to hear your perspective on how that shows up in other disciplines.
I think of like typographic conventions, which hardened, which are old, like how we read English is in many ways a consequence of movable type and the printing press. And so many of the conventions that we know of as like book typography are 500 years old. And we read by convention, right? So the page number, we know what that little number is because of where it is and where we've seen it before, etc. Those things are incredibly useful. So I guess in say interface design or user experience design, I can imagine that the technology moves so quickly, like the products change so radically in what they've been able to do in 20 years, that then those conventions need to evolve more quickly, and they need to evolve with like some imagination of like how you do this next thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking now about book layout and
Yeah.
all of the kind of esoteric methods of drawing a star across the page to get
Yes. Yeah.
the right dimensions that leave these big juicy margins
Yep.
for all the cool marginalia that you could write in with your fountain pen.
Absolutely.
One last thing that I want to touch on surrounding the book is something really interesting that you said in our last conversation that I think ties into this discussion of teaching design, the relationship to the material, its dynamism. You said that the kind of exterior form of the book can kind of set the conditions for how someone engages with it. But then as you get into the material, it kind of complicates itself in a way that keeps you going, but gives you like a really nuanced idea. And it strikes me that like that kind of consideration, not only of the book as an artifact, but also of the lessons themselves as a type of design as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think I probably described it as bait and switch before, which is, I think, something, it's a technique I like a lot, because, you present something as in a category that people already know what to expect. And so since we're dealing with conventions, that makes it easier to register some change when those conventions are slightly altered. And it's not about wholesale rejection. I feel like it's much more effective when you bring somebody along, so they say, oh, it's a book, I know what a book is about, and it's a book about graphic design. Okay, great, I'm expecting to learn how to do graphic design. Well, that's not what you're going to learn in a program for graphic design, but you'll hear from some other people who've either practiced graphic design or practiced do things that are adjacent to it, and you'll hear how they think about design, and hopefully that will open up your own ways of thinking around what it might mean to do design. And so I don't think that would happen if it was presented as like a revolutionary new approach to a chorus of people speaking about graphic design like that. You might come to it with expectations that aren't resolved. And so I think I'd much rather invite you to dinner and then talk to you about something that's more complicated than you were expecting after you've had a drink or two, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you've just put out this entire book of lessons about design, but what would you say is the most urgent thing that designers practicing today should be thinking about?
I guess what I try to foster is an individual response. And all I mean is I want students to develop their own approaches to how to do design, to how to think about it, and to really kind of build those points of view and build those like methods and ways of thinking, build them solidly for themselves, because I think they're going to get eroded by the process of doing design, where you're considering lots of factors. That's the great complication of it, but it's also, you can get lost, so I think I would have said the same thing a bunch of years ago. So it's not like necessarily, I mean, it's what I would still say is like the most important thing today. But if you graduate and you're working in design and, there's been a fairly significant shift into working in-house in larger teams, and there even more so, I feel like you might lose your individual perspective. And as a designer, like what you bring is your individual perspective, your intuition. And I think like intuition gets written out of design a bit more than it should. That's why I like invoking art and other practices that are, that absolutely rely on you knowing what to do. You just kind of like, you trust your own motivations and you trust your own lateral leaps. And so anything I can do to encourage that in students. And so sometimes that's like asking them to reflect on why they made choices and how that related to the last project and how that related to the previous project, and trying to emphasize that there's no method I can offer them that will be right for them. There's only a method they can develop for themselves that will be right for them. And I guess it's a position. You might think like, people have different relationships to how they think a design project should happen, and I'd love to see as many different ones as possible, and just never just passively accepting the way you're told it should be done. I mean,
right.
Individuality. There's something I love from John Cage, American artist, in the mid 20th century, who, when he was talking about teaching, he said, the only thing I can teach a student is that you are utterly alone. I think it's true.
I'm curious how you hold on to that, how you keep from that individual perspective being eroded over time, over many different kinds of projects.
I think you got to set up some practices, some ways for yourself to do that. So for me, it's like reading, like carving out time to read, thinking about that as part of my like design practice, and also like making lots of waste, like making lots of work that never sees the light of day. And I don't mean like 3 like extra options for some design project I'm working on, but just like following some path because not knowing where it's going to lead, and maybe it leads nowhere and you abandon it, and but maybe it makes 3 beautiful drawings along the way, and you maybe keep those or use those somewhere else. So, a strange thing, well, I won't say a strange, but something I found that also talking about your own work, whether it's in slideshows or, I think most often slideshows for me, actually solidifies what I think about it. Because inevitably there's some distance from when you did the work, and so you're talking about it. And so I always take like invitations to show or talk about work very seriously. I spend a lot of time on them, whether it's serious time or not. And I think that's also useful to like kind of tell yourself like, here's what I think because this is what I did, so I must have thought it. And here's, oh my goodness, it connects to this other thing that I did before, and that's a sign of success for me. It's also like people, I just reject the idea that you got to be new every time. I think it's more important to be like true than new. That sounds way too glib, but that's what I mean.
But I mean, that's a great, succinct answer. I think that's a good note to close on, David.
Great. Excellent.
Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
As I told you before we started recording, I've already become fixated on it multiple times.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you for joining me again on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. And I guess I just did something of what I was describing, which is like by talking about what I do, solidify it. The difficulty is not letting that ossify, right? So it's going to always stay.
Totally. You can subscribe to Design Notes on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. If you like the episode, pass it on to a friend and leave us a rating. Stay tuned for more conversations with creative practitioners across disciplines that will help us learn, piece by piece, what inspires and unites us in our work. And as always, thank you so much for listening.